One Friday night when I was in high school, I was just hanging out with my best friend Maya at her house and planning to sleep over that night. We weren't in the mood to watch a movie and felt like doing something more adventurous. She suggested that we go onto this anonymous video chat site that she had heard about from one of her friends at school. It was called Omegle, and I had never heard about it before. She said you could type in your interests and get randomly connected with people all over the world and could talk face to face with them. I was a little skeptical. My parents definitely wouldn't allow me to use a site like this, but I guess they would have no way of finding out. Maya kept trying to convince me, telling me it would be a great way to meet some cute guys. Eventually, I gave in and agreed. We were both sitting on Maya's bed, her laptop propped up in front of us. She pulled up the site and we read the warning message that popped up before you enter the site. It said that you had to be 18 years old or older to use the site without a parent. Neither Maya or I were 18 yet, but she clicked the start chatting button anyways. We waited a moment while it connected us with someone. Finally, a girl's face popped up on the screen. She was around our age. She smiled and waved to us, and we chatted with her for a few moments before moving on to the next person. It was a creepy-looking older guy who looked especially eager to see us. I told Maya to click off, and she did so before the man could get a word in. When we connected to the third person, both Maya and I gasped out loud. It was a figure sitting in a dimly lit room. The figure was wearing a horrifying clown mask. The mask reminded me of Pennywise the Clown from the horror movie. Hello? Maya said hesitantly. Hello, girls, the figure said. It was a male's voice, but I had no idea what age he was. He was wearing a strange black cloak and matching gloves, so we had no idea what he looked like. The room he was in looked similar to that of a basement. There was no paint on the walls, and I couldn't see any furniture in the background. It was a creepy vibe for sure. He proceeded to tell us he was so happy that we were there, and it was a delight to meet us. We just stared at the screen, our eyes transfixed at the strange scene. The man asked us if we would like to see a magic trick. Maya and I both glanced at each other hesitantly. Okay, I guess, Maya told him. Wonderful, he replied. He then stood up and moved just out of frame for a second. When he returned, he was carrying a silver case. He opened it up and pulled out a black top hat. He shook the top hat around to show us that it was empty. He then told us he would need our help with the trick. He told us that when he waved his hand over the hat to say the magic words, abracadabra, out loud. I thought the whole thing was weird, but desperately wanted to find out what this crazy person was going to do next. When he waved his hand over the hat, we both said the magic words as he had told us. He then reached into the once empty hat and pulled out a living white rabbit. Wow, I said, somewhat impressed. After holding the rabbit close to the camera so we could see, he put it back into the hat and told us to say the magic words again. We did, and he waved his hand over the hat. He then turned the hat over and the rabbit disappeared again. Maya and I both looked at each other in amazement. He then began the next trick. The camera was moved to show a dartboard hanging on the other side of the room. The man held a dart in one hand, turned around so that his back was facing the board, and threw the dart. I gasped when I saw that he had made the bullseye. He retrieved the dart and then said he was going to make things a little more interesting. He reached back into the case and pulled out a long, jagged knife. Again, he turned around, his back facing the dartboard. He hurled the knife over his shoulder at a startling force, and it slammed right into the board again, making a bullseye. And now for the finale. I'm going to need my assistant, he said loudly, his voice creepier than ever. He stepped out of frame for just a few moments, and Maya and I looked at each other in confusion, not knowing what to expect next. I was surprised when I heard the word assistant, because the whole time we had been chatting with this man, we hadn't heard anyone else present. Suddenly, the man walked back into the view of the camera. I was shocked by what I saw next. He was pushing a woman in one of those office chairs with wheels on the bottom. She was tied to the chair with ropes, her hands and legs bound tightly. There was duct tape over her mouth and tears running down her face. Wait, what's going on? I said, my panic rising. Something was not right. This is my lovely assistant, the man said. The woman looked to be in her early 20s. She had blonde hair that was hanging in her face, and one of her eyes appeared swollen. She was thrashing around on the chair, clearly trying to get free. Maya and I watched in utter horror as the man pushed the woman's chair so that it was back against the wall where the dartboard had been hanging. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a big red marker. He took off the cape and drew a small circle on the woman's forehead. He then ripped the duct tape off of her mouth. She instantly began screaming for help. Her screams cut me to my core. The man ignored her screams and walked back to where the camera was. At first, I was confused, not knowing what his plan was. But then suddenly Maya began screaming. She said that he had drawn a bullseye. As she said this, the man reached back into his case and pulled out an enormous knife. That was when it hit me what he was about to do next. I wish I had looked away, but I didn't. It was like my eyes were glued to the screen. I watched as the man turned his back to the girl, lifted the knife in the air, and hurled it right into her head. Her screams went silent, and the man let out a horrific laugh. Maya reached out and slammed the laptop closed. Maya was sobbing, but I sat there in silence, too stunned to process that we had just witnessed a murder. After she collected herself, she went and woke up her parents. After we explained to them what happened, they immediately called 911. We eventually had to go to the police station and describe in detail exactly what we saw. Maya had to turn over her laptop to the police so they could try to track the IP address. Months went by and they were eventually able to locate the suspect who was going by a different name all the way across the country. As it turned out, the woman that we saw that first day was not his first victim. Several bodies were located in an abandoned warehouse where he had been seen. He is now, thankfully, behind bars. During the beginning part of quarantine, I was home from school and super bored. We hadn't had in-person classes for weeks. I couldn't see my friends or really even leave the house except to go for a walk. I was sitting in my room trying to think of something fun to do when I suddenly remembered the video chat site Omegle. Back in middle school, I used to go on there all the time with my friends. I figured I would give it another try. After all, I didn't have anything else going on. I used the new feature where you can type in your interests in hopes of getting matched up with someone that you have things in common with. The interest I typed in was cooking, something I had been working on learning more about during the pandemic. I pressed enter and waited to be connected with someone. The first person I got paired up with was a girl my age. She was really sweet and we instantly hit it off. She told me about some cooking shows she really liked and mentioned that she thought I would probably enjoy them too. We were discussing different recipes when her mom called her to come down for dinner. We quickly exchanged phone numbers so we could chat more in the future and then got disconnected. I had enjoyed my first conversation so much that I decided to connect with another person. This time it was a guy. He was definitely older than I was by a decent amount, but he was also very cute. He greeted me, a smile on his face, and we began making small chat. He told me his name was Tony and that he was 19 years old. I was only 16 at the time, but I lied and said I was 18 years old so he would keep talking to me. He told me he was going to culinary school at a college in Chicago, which was only about 30 minutes from where I lived. I know I shouldn't have, but I got excited and told him what city I was from. We seemed to be really connecting and we talked on and off for over an hour. We ended up exchanging our Snapchats before disconnecting. The next day, Tony sent me a couple of Snapchats. They weren't of his face, they were just little snapshots of his day, like a latte he had gotten and a view from outside the window of a bus. I sent him a few Snapchats in return. We kept this up over the course of several weeks. Then one day I decided to ask him if he would want a video chat through the feature Snapchat has. He told me that he would like to do so and we set up a time that evening. When the time rolled around, I called him and he answered. Strangely, his camera was blurry and I couldn't make out anything. "Hello?" I said, but I didn't get an answer. While I was still connected, Tony messaged me saying that he had recently dropped his phone and he thought that it had properly damaged his camera and speaker. I told him that it was okay, we could just talk over chat instead, but he quickly told me no. He said that I could just talk as normal and he would answer through the chat, which I agreed to. The conversation started out normal with us just chatting about our day and how it had gone, but then after a few minutes, it took a very weird turn. He told me how beautiful I was and how much he wished he could be in person with me right now. I tried to steer the conversation back to cooking, but nothing worked. He began to get more and more graphic, describing things he wanted to do to me, He kept getting more and more uncomfortable. I didn't want to be talking about these things, and after all, I knew that it was wrong because I was a minor. I told him that I should really be going and that I had some homework to work on. He immediately got super intense and harsh with me. "Don't you dare hang up on me," he wrote in the chat, and even told me that if I hung up, I was going to be really sorry. I started to get really scared, so I quickly disconnected and then blocked him on Snapchat so he could no longer communicate with me. I hadn't given him my phone number or even told him my last name, so I assumed that would be the end of it. He wouldn't have any way of finding me online. How wrong I was. The next day, I was home alone while my parents were at work. My dad is a police officer and my mom works as a nurse, so neither one of them had the opportunity to stay home when the pandemic hit. So most days I would be home by myself, sometimes till around dinner time. The days were pretty boring, with virtual school, TV, and daily walks with my dog. On this particular day, I was in the middle of Zoom school when I got a text from an unknown number. I opened up the message, and it was my full name in capital letters. Underneath it said, "I told you you would regret blocking me." I immediately knew it was Tony. He must have found me somehow. I was scared, but didn't think I was in any immediate danger. After all, Tony had no way of knowing where I lived, and all my social media pages were private, so he wouldn't be able to find out any more personal information about me. I decided that the best thing to do was ignore him. I blocked the number again and tried my best to pay attention for the rest of the school day. When I was finally done with classes for the day, I decided to text my dad to see what time he would be home from work. It would usually just be he and I at dinner during the week since my mom worked late. He told me that he had gotten pulled into a high-profile case and wasn't going to be home until midnight or later. He said for me to go ahead and have dinner without him. I was a little disappointed. After so many hours in the house alone, it was beginning to feel a little lonely. I didn't feel like cooking that night, so I put some pizza rolls in a pan and placed it in the oven. Right as I was doing so, my phone began ringing. I picked it up and noticed that it was another unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered it. "Hello?" I said softly. The voice on the other line was gruff and scary. "If you don't answer my messages, you're going to be sorry," the person said. Immediately, I knew it was Tony, so I hung up the phone and blocked this new number. I was beginning to realize this was going to be a real problem. I could block him as much as I wanted, but he could still get a different number to call me from. I brushed it off as best I could and told me that he would get bored and go after someone else eventually. After having dinner, I cleaned up the kitchen and went up to my room to scroll through some TikToks. I was getting sleepy and about ready to change into my pajamas when all of a sudden there was a huge shattering noise that caused me to jump up with a gasp. I saw glass on the floor and quickly realized that someone had thrown a rock through my window, breaking it. The rock was large, definitely big enough to cause some damage if it hit me. I glanced at the rock closer and saw that it had a note attached to it. My fingers shaking, I picked it up and read it. "Open your front door now," it read in big, bold letters. I had barely finished reading it when I heard a loud, aggressive pounding on the front door. Immediately, I thought of Tony. He had come for me. I rushed to my bedroom door and locked it. I then grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I told the dispatcher I was in danger and needed help right away. It took 7 minutes for the police to arrive, and the pounding continued until the police sirens were roaring outside. Tony tried to run, but luckily a neighbor watching the whole thing had seen which direction he went in and told the police. They caught up with him shortly after, and he was arrested. It turned out that he had a long track record of becoming obsessed with women and harassing them. I'm very lucky that I got help before something worse happened. I was really shy growing up and had trouble meeting friends. One evening when I was bored, I decided to try out the popular chat site Omegle. I decided to use the text feature as opposed to video. I always found that when I was texting instead of talking in person, I was less awkward because I had more time to formulate a response or think of something witty. I ended up getting connected with a girl who was the same age as me. Her name was Erin and she lived in California, the exact opposite side of the country as me. We ended up totally hitting it off and having a great conversation. I loved hearing about what life was like in California, a place I had always dreamed of visiting. Similarly, she liked hearing about life in New York, where I lived. We ended up exchanging numbers and we began texting on a daily basis. We talked about everything from school to shows we liked and our different celebrity crushes. I had a few close friends, but this friendship was different. It felt like Erin really cared when I told her about my day or ranted about different things I was passionate about. The strange thing was, I don't even know her last name. She would occasionally send me selfies though, so I felt like I knew who I was talking to. We talked nearly every day for a month. One day I decided to ask Erin if she would like to video chat. She said that her laptop camera was broken and that she was waiting to get it fixed. I brushed it off since this made sense at the time. Sometimes I would even send to her a selfie or two just so she could have an idea of what I looked like. Every time I did, she would shower me in compliments and tell me how beautiful I was. No one else really said things like that to me, so it made me feel really good and definitely boosted my confidence. I always told her that she was way prettier than me, which she always denied. Months went by and we got closer and closer. I considered her my closest friend at the time. The more we got to know each other, the more comfortable I got sharing more personal details about my life with her. I told her that my mother had breast cancer and how hard it had been on the family. She was a great listener and gave me lots of support, which meant a lot to me. I also talked about a guy I liked at school, and she encouraged me to go after him. One day, Erin told me that she had a secret she wanted to tell me. She said she was worried I would be mad when I found out. I was curious what she could mean, but assured her I would not be mad. She then told me that she had gotten her laptop camera fixed and wanted to tell me the secret over video chat. I was so excited to talk to her. I propped up my computer and gave her a call. When the camera connected, I was shocked by what I saw. I was face to face with a middle-aged man in a ripped white undershirt. At first I thought it was Erin's dad or someone, but then he said, "Hello, I'm Erin. It's nice to meet you." I gasped and my mouth dropped open. He then began to laugh like a madman at the top of his lungs. I slammed my laptop shut and burst into tears as I realized that I had been the victim of a sick joke. The person I thought I had known so well was nothing like they appeared to be. This experience crushed me, and I never used Omegle again. The first weekend after I broke up with Matt, my parents were out of town for a high school reunion or something. I was excited to have the house to myself for the first time in literally a year, with no boyfriend begging to come over the second my parents' car left the driveway. My big plans didn't include a party or a sleepover. No, I was going to have a weekend of total self-care. I was gonna turn off my phone, catch up on some TV shows, maybe even read a book, and of course, there would be pizza. On Saturday morning, I waved goodbye to my parents as they drove off and put my phone in a kitchen drawer, ready to enjoy my weekend. Everything was going great until the sun started going down, and I've gotta be honest, I started to get a tiny bit spooked. I hadn't slept alone in the house, ever. I thought about getting my phone again just so I could watch some videos or something as I fell asleep. As if on cue, my MacBook sprung to life and I could see that my friend Amy was trying to FaceTime me. I grabbed my MacBook off my desk and hit answer, smiling with relief until I saw the look on her face. "Thank God you're okay," she said. "Why aren't you picking up your phone? You need to check Snap Map right now." I literally had no idea what she was talking about. I picked up my laptop to take it with me down to the kitchen. I was kind of freaked out by the way she was acting and didn't want to go down there alone. I asked her if she was trying to prank me or something, and she looked at me like I was an idiot. I turned on all the lights as I went through my house until I got to the kitchen. It was then I noticed something was wrong. The sliding glass door that led to my backyard was slightly open. I could feel the cool breeze from outside drafting in. I grabbed my phone out of the drawer and my hands shook as I switched it back on. I was greeted by what must have been hundreds of notifications. They all sprung up on my screen so fast my phone couldn't keep up with the notification vibrations. Anna told me to hurry and check Snap Map, and my heart stopped. I could see myself at my house, and in the same spot was a contact I didn't recognize. They had their Bitmoji dressed in all red, and the area surrounding me was lit up blue and green with an abundance of activity. I tapped my screen and watched in confusion and horror as my own house popped up onto the screen. The username of the person recording was househunting666. In the first clip, they were obviously standing at the edge of my backyard, filming me as I made dinner. That was a few hours ago. What the hell had they done since then? Over the next couple of videos, my suspicions were confirmed. They opened the sliding door, which I stupidly forgot to lock, and snuck inside. It gave me goosebumps to think that this person had been where I stood at that exact moment. They went through my living room, my dad's office, even the garage. How hadn't I heard them? And then they started walking upstairs. I could see the light from my bedroom coming out from the cracks in the doorway and even just barely hear the movie I'd been watching. My whole body froze as I watched them reach for my door handle with a gloved hand, only to pull back suddenly at the sound of my voice. That must have been when I got the call from Anna, which meant they were almost definitely still in my house. I could hear police sirens now getting closer and closer, but my eyes were still fixed on my phone screen. The person had watched me go downstairs with my laptop and started following me. Just as the video ended, I saw a flash and looked up just in time to see the figure illuminated in the doorway to the kitchen. I screamed. I screamed so loud my ears were ringing and ran as fast as I could out of the sliding door, slamming it shut behind me. I kept screaming as I rounded my house and burst through the side gate onto the front lawn, where cars were flashing blue and red, pulling up to the front. The cops ran inside and a few minutes later came out with a masked figure in handcuffs. I watched from the back of the ambulance as they patted him down and pulled a huge knife out of the pocket on his sweater. They then pulled his mask off and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Matt. Later, he told the cops he only wanted to scare me because he was mad about our breakup, but that's not what the evidence said. He texted everybody he knew before he came to my place saying the same thing. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do. He won't be getting out for a long time, and I've removed my location from Snapchat. I always loved dog sitting for my grandparents. Since I was their only grandkid and lived a couple of towns over, they spent most of their time looking after their dogs, a pack of 5 pugs, all varying in age and origin story. Plato came from a long line of show-winning pugs, and Pig was found in a newspaper ad from the local shelter. Usually my mom was in charge of watching the boys when my grandparents went out of town, but now that I was 17, that responsibility was passed on to me. I also suspected my grandparents wanted to use it as an excuse to give me some money for college. I pulled up to their house and saw my grandpa lifting suitcases into the back of their car, ready for a week away at their lake house. They'd explained to me before that they would take the boys, except Percy had a habit of throwing himself off the dock. They brought me inside for a cup of coffee before they hit the road, and I was greeted with a chorus of pug snorts and timid barking. They took me through the walking and feeding routines, which dogs needed meds, and which were most likely to bite if I didn't give them treats quick enough. Didn't matter all that much, since they literally gave me a handbook complete with a timetable as they went out the door. Suddenly, without adult supervision in the house, I felt a little overwhelmed as my wrinkly companion stared up at me with some confusion and anticipation. Maybe they figured I was nervous and that if anything happened to them, my grandma would throw me over a cliff, and that's why they decided to take it easy on me. After a slightly chaotic walk and dinner, things were going pretty well, until they weren't. As I was texting my mom to tell her how well the first day had gone, I got a message on Snap from my friend Jake. Dude, have you seriously got a girl over at your grandparents' place? LOL, the message said. I frowned at my screen and quickly messaged him back with a bunch of question marks. Look at your map, she has her location on. Still totally confused, I opened my Snap map, and sure enough, it looked like there was a second person at my grandparents' house. A Bitmoji resembling a girl with long blonde hair. What was weird was I didn't recognize the user at all, and I definitely didn't invite her to my grandparents' house. I figured maybe it was just someone walking nearby or someone had dropped their phone on the sidewalk. It was dark out, but I went to take a look using the torch on my phone to make sure I didn't stand on anything by mistake. I searched around in the front yard for a few minutes but couldn't find anything. There wasn't even anyone walking through the neighborhood. I checked my map again and the Bitmoji hadn't moved, even though they'd been active just a couple of minutes ago. I figured it must be a glitch until I heard the dogs barking. I jumped at the sounds of the pugs yapping from the house and I raced inside. I had no idea what I was going to do if I came face to face with an intruder. All I knew is that the consequences would be equally as bad for my grandparents if I let something happen to those dogs. The house looked untouched, but when I rushed into the living room, all the dogs were barking at the window. Well, 4 of the dogs were. I couldn't see Plato in his bright red collar, and just as I started calling for him, my phone buzzed. The mysterious user sent me a photo of Plato in a crate in the back of a van with text over the image saying, "Gotcha." I looked at the snap map to see if I could track where they were headed, but by now they'd disabled the setting. I called the cops and my parents, who took on the task of calling my grandparents to tell them what happened. Of course, they were totally heartbroken, but at the same time, they were glad that they'd only managed to take Plato. The authorities couldn't trace who took him, the account was long deleted by the time they got involved, and they were totally off the radar. We'd come to terms with the fact that we'd never see Plato again until a couple of months later when my grandma got a call from a vet, saying someone had dropped him off with them. He was totally unharmed, and the receptionist that took him in said the mysterious guy who abandoned Plato just told her he found him as a stray and he was gonna keep him, but he was the most annoying dog he'd ever met. They never did catch the guy, and I never sat alone for my grandparents again. But at least Plato was home safe, and no one tried to trick me via Snap Map again. I've tried to tell this story 100 times, and every time I get a different response. Some people believe me, some call me a liar, but you can make up your own mind. I'd just moved into my first place by myself, and I was stoked. No more roommates or pesky neighbors. I was in my own little slice of heaven. I was shocked by how cheap the place was. An old stone cottage out by the sea with a ton of character and history. My closest neighbors were the seagulls that congregated on the sand dunes, waking me up with their squawking. Everything seemed normal at first. I thrifted and upcycled a lot of the furniture that I collected from Facebook Marketplace and thrift stores, a total cottagecore fantasy. I got most of my groceries from the farmer's market and even started baking my own bread. It took one little thing for all that to change. I noticed that things had started to move around. One night after I finished dinner, I went to wash my plate and saw all the pots and pans that I had put in the sink were now spread out on the counter, still soapy and wet. I convinced myself that I must have taken them out and forgot about it, but in the back of my mind, I knew that something was off. Over the next few weeks, things slowly escalated. My keys went missing and I'd find them in the toilet. Brand new light bulbs started flickering. I never felt like I was truly alone. It wasn't until I finally got my Wi-Fi working that things got really scary. I ran out of data a couple of days before, so I'd basically been off the radar. I started wading through my notifications on my phone, responding to messages, and sending pictures of my newly decorated bedroom to my mom. Then I noticed something weird on Snapchat. I wasn't the only person in my location. I was one of 4. The other people at the location didn't have Bitmojis or usernames. They were just gray shapes. I figured it was a glitch at first, but it creeped me out, especially since there isn't anyone else for miles around. But then they started moving. Sometimes they were in the backyard or by the front of the house. Sometimes their Bitmojis were right on top of mine. It was after this discovery that things started to get worse in the house to the point where I was scared to sleep without the lights on. I could hear footsteps in the hallway, walking towards my door, and then they would stop when they couldn't get closer. One time, I swear I saw my door handle move. It's a good thing I always remember to lock my door. The last straw came when I went back to the city to visit my mom for the weekend. When I get back, I knew before I even parked my car that something was wrong. All of the doors and windows were wide open. The house was full of sea air and half my stuff was soaked from a rainstorm that happened while I was gone. I called the police and they were less than helpful. Even though I knew I'd locked everything before leaving, there was no sign of a broken window or door lock. Whoever opened them had a key. Since none of my stuff was missing either, there wasn't really anything to report, and they left without opening any kind of investigation. Their theory was that I had forgotten to lock every door and window when I went out of town and that the storm blew them open. I knew better. As soon as they were gone, I stormed back into the house. "This is my house," I shouted. "I live here now and you are not welcome here anymore." As soon as I said that, I wished I hadn't. It was like my house erupted. Everything started flying around me at once, and it was so loud and quick I was lucky not to get hit by anything. I got down to the floor and covered my head, waiting for something to hit me or for everything to go quiet. It could have been an hour later or a minute, but suddenly everything went quiet. I slowly lifted my head and it was like nothing ever happened. All my furniture was back in place, the doors and windows were closed, nothing had even looked broken, except for one thing. All of my kitchen blades and scissors were stabbed into my hardwood floors in a circle around me. I knew what a threat looked like, and I knew it was time for me to leave. Over a year later, I can't say I love my new apartment as much as that cottage, but at least I feel safe again. I'm still trying to sell the damn place, and even though I haven't been back since I moved out the furniture, I sometimes still watch the strange gray figures hovering around the lot on SnapMap. When I was in 7th or 8th grade, Club Penguin was all the rage. My friends and I all enjoyed going online at the same time every day after school and playing together. It was a simple concept, really. It involved earning coins, playing games, decorating our virtual igloos, and sometimes messaging with other users. One day I sat down at my computer and pulled up Club Penguin to play for a while before starting my homework. I checked the usual virtual places my friends and I would hang out on the site, but quickly realized they hadn't logged in yet. I decided I would play a few games to pass the time until my friends joined in. But just before I clicked to open a game, I got a message from another user. Most of the time, I would just chat with my friends while playing, and I didn't recognize this person's username, but I decided to open the message anyway. The conversation started as small talk regarding aspects of the game, but then started to get a little weird. The person wanted to know how old I was, what my social media pages were, and what I looked like. It's a strict rule in Club Penguin not to give out your personal information to anyone else on the site for your own protection. That's why my username had nothing in it that would give anything away about me, and my full name wasn't anywhere on my account that anyone could see. I had a bad feeling about the person who was messaging me, so I ended up blocking him and playing for another hour or so before eventually logging off for the day. I went to my room and got started on my homework. About 30 minutes or so had gone by when I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. I figured it was just spam, but I opened it up anyway. My blood went cold as soon as I read the message. There was only 5 words, but it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. It read, "Why did you block me?" I knew instantly it had to have been the guy from Club Penguin. I had not blocked anyone else anytime recently. I decided to pretend not to know and texted back, "Who is this?" The reply came a short time later. It read, "You know who this is, Cassandra." Even though I usually go by Cass, Cassandra is my full name. The fact that the person had somehow found this out scared me to my core. I didn't respond for the rest of the evening. I was just about to go to bed when I heard my phone vibrate, causing me to feel on edge. I picked up the phone and sadly saw it was the same unknown number as before. This time, a picture had been sent with no text. I clicked on it, horrified by what I saw. It was a photo of the outside of my school. It didn't look like any photo that could have been found online, but rather one that had been taken in person. I ended up telling my parents everything that had gone on, and they filed a police report. They traced the phone number to a middle-aged man who lived in a few cities over. He later faced a slew of charges, one of which was related to sending inappropriate text messages and pictures to underage girls. I am relieved to know that he is now behind bars. I'm a female gamer, so I have come across plenty of creeps in my day. But there is one story from back in high school that outdoes every creeper encounter I think I've experienced. I was a big fan of Modern Warfare, and there was a group of about 4 or 5 people I would play with on an almost daily basis. 3 of them were real-life friends of mine who went to my school, but a couple of others were just online friends who I never met. One of these people that I played with but didn't know in real life was a guy who I'll call Craig. Craig claimed to be in his early 20s, but just from his voice and the way he talked, I kind of got the feeling that he was older than that. Whatever, it didn't really matter to me as long as he was fun to game with. Things started out great and our group was a great team. But as time went on, things started to get a little bit weird with Craig. He would try to get me to do private game sessions without the rest of the group, would send me private messages, and ask me how my day was going. And sometimes would even refuse to take part in a game if I wasn't also playing. This wasn't just something I noticed. The rest of the group did as well, and we all thought it was kind of strange. It almost felt like Craig was trying to isolate me from the rest of the group. I didn't approach him about it, but I did try to put some distance between the two of us. I would take a long time to answer his messages if I even replied at all, and I denied any of his requests to take part in a private gaming session. As time progressed, Craig became even more frustrated and desperate until he finally spilled his guts to me in a private message. He claimed he thought that he was in love with me and that not being with me was killing him inside, even causing him to experience a deep depression. I questioned how he could feel this way. After all, he hadn't even seen a picture of me before. But he claimed he didn't care what I looked like and just wanted to be with me. His message became borderline obsessive, and I started to get pretty creeped out, so I blocked him. I was a fool to think blocking him through the same system would ever be enough to stop Craig. He was incredibly internet savvy. Somehow, through the limited information I had told the group about myself, he managed to find out my full name and track me down on every social media platform, even ones such as Pinterest and Reddit, where I didn't even have any followers. I would block him on one platform, only for him to add me on another one. He sent hundreds of messages through these social media platforms and confessed his love for me in each one. Just when I thought I had Craig blocked on everything, he managed to get my phone number. The texts and calls were constant. It didn't matter if I blocked one number, he would just call me from a different one. It got to the point that I would only answer my phone if I had the number already entered into my contacts. Finally, I decided enough was enough, and I filed a police report. The police tracked the messages from Craig to a man who lives in Tennessee. Not only was he not in his early 20s, but he was middle-aged, married, and had 2 kids. His wife had no idea what he was doing behind her back. I ultimately got a restraining order, and thankfully have not heard a peep from Craig ever since. When I was in high school, one of my closest friends, Samantha, and I would often play Minecraft together as a way to distress. There were these 2 guys in particular that we would play with pretty frequently. We only knew them by their first names, Connor and Riley. We would often message each other through the in-game text feature. Between the 4 of us, we had a great time. There was a lot of playful teasing and lighthearted banter. It seemed like the perfect gaming group to be in. Samantha and I had never met Connor or Riley in person, but as time went on, it felt like we had been friends with them for years. We spent so much time together playing and chatting, and we knew a lot about each other's lives. It felt like we were more than gaming partners, but actual real-life friends. We would always let each other know when we were going through something difficult in our lives, even as small as an upcoming math test we were worrying about. Sometimes we would chat about different entertainment-related topics like popular new movies or our favorite television shows. We ended up sharing each other's numbers and starting a group text that we would often communicate in. One day, the guys texted us saying that they were going to be only about an hour away from me and Samantha's city the following week. They were in town to visit a friend and thought this would be the perfect opportunity for us to all meet each other. Naturally, Samantha and I were ecstatic and totally on board. I know to some people it might seem crazy to feel comfortable meeting up with people we had only known through the internet, but it wasn't like that to us. We felt so close to Connor and Riley, and the fact that we would even have the chance to meet them in real life was like a dream come true. They told us that they were going to be having a party at their friend's house that Saturday around 8 p.m. and passed the address on to us. We told them that we would be sure to be there. When Saturday night rolled around, I told my parents I would be spending the night at Samantha's, and she told her parents that she would be spending the night at my house. Around 8 p.m., we set off in my car to the location we had been given. I started to get a bad vibe when the GPS guided us to a trailer park. I have nothing against trailer homes, but the guys had described a totally different scene to us. It was supposedly a large house with a pool and a bonfire out back. Samantha texted them to tell them that we thought we might be at the wrong place, but both guys responded telling us to keep following the GPS and we would end up at the right spot without any problem. We did as we were told and ended up in the parking lot of a dilapidated trailer home. We were both too scared to go in and at this point had a suspicious feeling about the whole situation. Just as Samantha was calling the guys to verify we were at the right place, 2 scary middle-aged men ran out of the trailer home and made a beeline towards our vehicle. We both screamed out loud and I began to back out of the driveway as quickly as possible. The men followed us for a good distance until we were finally able to lose them when we hit the highway. I ended up telling my parents everything and they filed a police report, but the men were never found. Samantha and I blocked both of the guys online and luckily haven't heard from them since. During my junior year of high school, nearly all of my friends had boyfriends, and we're all talking about prom coming up. The event was still several months away, but a lot of girls had already picked out their dress and decided what hairstyle they were going to do. I was shy and had never really had a boyfriend before. I really wanted to go to prom with all of my friends, but I knew it would be way too embarrassing to go alone. At this point, I didn't feel like it was likely that any of my classmates were going to ask me to prom. So one night, I decided to do something that was totally out of my character. I downloaded a dating app and made a profile. I always got so nervous talking to guys in person, but maybe if I had time to think and type out perfect responses, I would be more successful this way. I adjusted the settings so that only people my age that lived in the same city as me would be able to message me. I picked out the most flattering pictures of myself that I could find and began clicking through different profiles, swiping right on a few guys that I thought were cute. Surely one of them would be interested in me. I made myself wait a whole hour before going back to my phone to check the app. I was thrilled to see that I had gotten a match. The guy was super cute with curly brown hair, blue eyes, and adorable freckles. He didn't put his full name on his profile, just his initials, AJ. I clicked on his message, excitement bubbling in my stomach. He said he thought that I was pretty and wanted to get to know me better. I typed back a response telling him I thought he was cute and was open to talking. It was like an instant connection. Our conversation flowed so effortlessly. I had never had such a good time talking to a boy before. He told me that he went to one of the local private high schools not far from where I lived. He was on the baseball team and worked part-time at his dad's restaurant. When he got to college, he wanted to study to become a sports reporter. I told him about how I was hoping to get a scholarship to study to become a veterinarian in college. We talked for hours about everything you could think of, from our favorite books and movies to our favorite ice cream flavors. I stayed up well past midnight that night, texting away. As the weeks went on, AJ and I continued to get closer and closer. I was working up the courage to ask him to prom, but felt like it still wasn't the time. After all, we had just started talking, and we hadn't even met in person yet. One night, I asked if he would want to talk on the phone. That way, we would at least know what each other's voices sounded like. But he told me that he shared a room with his younger brother, and would be embarrassed to talk around him. I understood this and just shrugged it off. As time went on, it was getting closer and closer to prom, and I knew I needed to figure out my plans if I was going to get a dress in time. I suggested to AJ that we meet up somewhere. This would allow me to bring up the topic of prom in person and for us to hopefully get to know one another better. I suggested we meet at a local ice cream place, which seemed like a good neutral location for a first meetup. AJ agreed, and he told me he would pick me up on Friday at 7 p.m. I was ecstatic. This was about to be my first date, and how sweet it was of AJ to offer to drive me. When the night of the date arrived, I spent forever picking out the perfect outfit. I changed several times to get just the right look. After spending way too much time on my hair and makeup, I sat by the window to look for his car. He told me that he drove a black Honda and would pick me up right in front of the house. He apologized, saying that the lock on the passenger side door was jammed, so I would have to sit in the back. I told him it was fine and I didn't mind at all. When I saw AJ's car pull up to my house, I tried not to look overly excited as I walked outside. I opened the passenger side door and jumped in, a little bit nervousness in my stomach. I was surprised to see that AJ didn't say anything or turn around to greet me when I got into the car. He simply began driving. I couldn't see his face, just the back of his head. I craned my neck up to catch a glance at him in the rearview mirror, and my heart nearly stopped. The man driving the car was not AJ. He was way older than me and looked nothing like the pictures on the dating profile. Had I gotten in the wrong car? Was this someone else's Uber that had picked me up by mistake? I spoke up, telling the man that there had been some kind of mix-up. He assured me that there was no mix-up and that he was exactly who I was supposed to meet. My blood ran cold as the realization finally passed over me. I had been catfished. I couldn't believe how stupid and naive I had been, missing so many red flags over the last couple of months. Now I had gotten myself into a scary situation I had no idea how to get out of. This was the kind of story you heard on the news, but I never thought it would happen to me. The man told me to pass him my phone, which I did, not wanting to anger him in any way. The man was silent as he drove and drove for miles. I was too scared to say a word, but thought only of how I could try to escape. There were child locks on the doors, so jumping out of the car wasn't going to be an option. I couldn't call 911. I would have to wait until whenever we reached our destination to make some kind of run for it. The man drove through the countryside and pulled up to what appeared to be a farmhouse. There were cows and chickens out in the pasture, and what looked to be a pretty well-kept home. My captor parked the car and got out before coming around to my side. He opened the door and pulled me out by the arm. He pulled me inside the house and sat me down at the kitchen table. There was no one else in sight. He offered me food and water, which I refused. This seemed to frustrate him, and he sat down at the table next to me, a desperate look on his face. He told me that he knew that I wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but he still thought we could be friends. He told me that we had so much in common and that he never met a girl as interesting as me. I was disgusted and shocked. This man was clearly deranged. He was easily decades older than me and wanted to date me. The only positive thing I could find about this situation was that the guy didn't seem like he wanted to hurt me. It just seemed like he was obsessed with me. My captor was desperate to show me how much he wanted to be with me. He guided me to his bedroom, telling me he had something to show me. When he opened the door, I felt my jaw drop when I came face to face with hundreds of pictures of myself. The walls, ceiling, every surface of the room was covered in pictures from my dating profile. He asked me if I liked it, and I nodded, deciding that was my best option, was to just act like I was open to being with him. We sat down in the living room and I began to come up with somewhat of a plan. I told the man that I was thirsty and I wanted a soda. He seemed eager to fulfill my request and got up to make his way to the kitchen. The second he was out of sight, I ran to the same door that I had come in from, fumbled with the lock, and managed to swing it open. I could tell by the creaking sound the door made when it opened that the man would have been able to hear it from the other room. I took off running across the long yard and took off down the street. I heard the buzz of a pickup truck in the distance and knew he was coming after me. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I just needed to put as much distance between myself and the man as possible. I saw a wooded area and ran towards it, knowing the man would never be able to get through the woods unless he did it on foot. I stumbled through the dense foliage, tripping a few times. After running for what seemed like ages, I came to a clearing. I saw a small, tidy-looking cottage and an older woman out front of it watering her flowers. I sprinted towards her, telling her that I had been abducted and needed help right away. The woman took me inside her house and called 911. Her husband stood guard by the door with a gun in case my captor tried to get in. In less than 15 minutes, the man was found and arrested. I came out of the situation shaken up and somewhat embarrassed, but okay. While it may work for some people, I don't think online dating is for me. If you're wondering, I did end up getting a date to prom that year. A sweet, quiet boy from my math class asked me, and we're still dating. As for my catfish, I won't ever have to worry about him, as he'll be in jail for many years to come. My warning for you is that with online dating, not everyone is who they seem. What would you have done in this situation? Was she lucky to get away? Drop a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, sleep tight and stay safe.